I never thought a snow shovel would become the hill I'd die on. But when Karen from the HOA threatened to fine me $200 for storing garden tools against my garage wall, something inside me snapped. My name is Ryan Shepard, and I'd been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Columbus, Ohio, for exactly 3 years when this whole mess started. I'm a 34-year-old software developer who works from home, minds his own business, and just wants to live in peace. My house is a modest 2-story colonial with beige siding, black shutters, and a perfectly maintained lawn that I mow every Saturday morning without fail. I follow the rules, pay my dues on time, and generally try to be the kind of neighbor nobody complains about. Then Brenda Morrison became HOA president. Brenda was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 47 years old with that distinctive angular haircut that somehow defied both gravity and common sense. Always wore athleisure, where despite never actually exercising, and had perfected the art of the judgmental stare over her designer sunglasses. She drove a white Lexus SUV with custom plates that read Rules 1 Cent, which should have been my first warning sign. It was a Tuesday morning in late February when I heard the knock on my door. I'd been in the middle of a video conference call, so I put myself on mute and jogged downstairs, figuring it was a package delivery. Instead, I found Brenda standing on my front porch with a clipboard, her mouth already forming that pursed expression that meant trouble. "Ryan," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need to discuss a violation with you." I blinked at her, still wearing my headset. "Can this wait? I'm in the middle of work. This will only take a moment." She consulted her clipboard with theatrical importance. "I was doing my monthly neighborhood inspection this morning, and I noticed you have gardening tools visibly stored against your garage wall, specifically a snow shovel, a rake, and what appears to be a hoe." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I said, "You mean the tools on the side of my garage, the side that faces my backyard, the side that's visible from the Hendersons' second-story window," she corrected. "According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA covenant, all outdoor storage must be screened from view." "You're in direct violation. Brenda, it's 3 garden tools leaning against a wall. They're not even visible from the street." She made a mark on her clipboard. "Visibility from any neighboring property constitutes a violation. I'm issuing you a formal warning. If the items aren't removed or properly screened within 7 days, you'll receive a fine of $200. $200 for a shovel, for willful disregard of community standards," she said, handing me a printed violation notice. 7 days, Ryan. Have a good day." She turned and walked back to her Lexus, which was parked directly in front of my house, blocking my driveway. I watched her drive away, the violation notice crumpling in my fist. That's when I noticed something I'd seen dozens of times before but never really thought about. 3 houses down on Maple Drive, clearly visible from where I stood, sat Brenda's house. And in her driveway, taking up nearly the entire space and extending at least 4 feet past her garage door, was her husband's 22-foot fishing boat on a trailer. I'd seen that boat every single day for the past year. It never moved. It just sat there, a massive blue and white eyesore with "real time" painted on the side in cursive letters. The trailer had 2 flat tires, the boat cover was stained and sagging with collected rainwater, and the whole setup blocked not only their driveway but also partially obstructed the sidewalk. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Back inside, I abandoned my video conference with a quick excuse about a family emergency and went straight to my home office. I opened the HOA covenant document that I'd received when I bought the house, the one I'd skimmed once and filed away, assuming I'd never need it. I started reading. Section 12. Paragraph 4 did indeed state that outdoor storage needed to be screened from view. But Section 9, Paragraph 2 had some very interesting language about vehicle and recreational vehicle storage. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. No boat, recreational vehicle, or trailer shall be parked in any driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours. All such vehicles must be stored in an enclosed garage, behind a privacy fence in the backyard, or in an approved off-site storage facility. 48 hours. Brenda's boat had been sitting in that driveway for over a year. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Tom Henderson, the guy whose second-story window apparently had such a tragic view of my garden tools. "Tom, it's Ryan from across the street. Quick question. Has Brenda from the HOA ever said anything to you about being able to see my garage from your upstairs?" Tom laughed. "What? No, man. I can barely see your roof from up there, let alone your garage. Why? She's trying to find me for storing a shovel against my garage wall. Claims it's visible from your window. That's insane. I've never even noticed it, and Sarah and I are up there every day. You know what I do notice? That damn boat of theirs. It's been sitting there so long, birds are nesting in it. Has she ever tried to find anyone else for petty stuff like this?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Actually, yeah. She hit up the Petersons last month for having their trash cans visible from the street the morning after pickup. They had to pay $75 because they didn't bring them in before 7 in the morning. And she made Mrs. Chen repaint her mailbox because the black paint had faded to a slightly different shade of black." "You're kidding." "I wish I was." "Brenda's been on a power trip since she became president. Her and that vice president, Linda, they're like the fun police." I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind already working through the possibilities. I spent the next 2 hours reading every single word of the HOA covenant, taking notes, highlighting passages. The document was 63 pages long and written in the kind of dense legal language that made my eyes cross, but I pushed through. By the time I finished, I had a clear picture of what was happening. The covenant was strict, sure, but it applied equally to everyone. Brenda had been selectively enforcing rules against other people while completely ignoring her own violations. And the boat situation wasn't just a minor infraction. According to the fine schedule in Appendix C, violations of the RV and boat parking rules carried a fine of $500 for the first offense, with an additional $250 for each month the violation continued. At over a year of continuous violation, Brenda owed the HOA somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 in fines. I sat back in my chair, a smile spreading across my face. If Brenda wanted to play by the rules, we'd play by the rules. The next morning, I put my shovel and garden tools in my garage, even though it annoyed me to give up the convenient storage spot. I wasn't going to give Brenda any ammunition. Then I got in my car and drove slowly through the neighborhood, documenting every single HOA violation I could find. It took me 3 hours, but the results were impressive. I found 14 houses with boats, RVs, or trailers parked in driveways. I found 7 houses with trash cans visible from the street outside of collection hours. I found 5 houses with lawn ornaments that violated the decorative standards section, 3 houses with basketball hoops positioned too close to the street, and 1 house with a mailbox that was painted bright purple, which definitely wasn't on the approved color list. I compiled everything into a detailed spreadsheet, complete with photos, addresses, specific covenant violations, and calculated fines. Then I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. Dear HOA board members, I wrote, I recently received a violation notice for storing garden tools against my garage wall. While I have corrected this issue, the notice prompted me to review our community covenant in detail. During this review, I discovered numerous ongoing violations throughout our neighborhood that appear to have been overlooked during routine inspections. As a concerned homeowner who values the integrity and fairness of our community standards, I am bringing these violations to your attention. Please find attached documentation of 29 separate covenant violations, including detailed photographs and specific citations. I trust the board will address these matters with the same diligence and urgency that was applied to my garden tool storage issue. I printed out the entire package, all 47 pages of it, and put it in a manila envelope. Then I looked up the meeting schedule. The next HOA board meeting was in 6 days, on Monday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center. Perfect timing. I hand-delivered the envelope to the community center's drop box, where all official HOA correspondence was supposed to be deposited. According to the bylaws, any correspondence received more than 72 hours before a meeting had to be added to the agenda and distributed to all board members at least 24 hours in advance. Then I waited. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Brenda's number. Ryan, this is Brenda Morrison from the HOA. I need to speak with you about a letter you submitted. Good afternoon, Brenda. What about it? This is highly inappropriate. You can't just submit a massive complaint document like this. There are proper channels. I used the proper channels. I submitted it to the official drop box with proper notice before the meeting. That's exactly what the bylaws specify. Her voice took on an edge. You're wasting the board's time with petty complaints. Most of these violations are minor issues that don't warrant formal action. Interesting, I said. So when I have a shovel against my garage wall, that's worth a $200 fine. But when 14 people park boats and RVs in their driveways for months at a time, that's minor. Silence. Then, those situations are different. How? They just are. Look, Ryan, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish here, but this kind of vindictive behavior doesn't reflect well on you as a community member. Vindictive? I'm just ensuring that our community standards are being applied fairly and consistently. Isn't that what the HOA is supposed to do? I'm warning you, don't push this. Is that a threat, Brenda? It's advice. The board doesn't take kindly to troublemakers. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling my anger rise. The sheer audacity of calling me a troublemaker for pointing out that she and her friends were violating the same rules they were forcing everyone else to follow was breathtaking. I called Tom Henderson again. Hey, do you know who else is on the HOA board besides Brenda? There's Linda Walters as vice president, Joe Martinez as treasurer, and I think Sally Chen and Bob Preston are the members at large. Why? Do you know if any of them are reasonable people? Joe's pretty level-headed. Bob's okay. Linda's basically Brenda's puppet. Sally might be reasonable, but she keeps her head down mostly. And does Brenda actually have a majority vote locked up? I don't think so. From what I've heard, Joe and Bob have pushed back on some of her crazier ideas, but Linda always votes with Brenda, and Sally usually abstains or goes along to avoid conflict. It's been a 3-2 split on most controversial stuff, with Brenda's side winning. Interesting. Thanks, Tom. Over the weekend, I did more homework. I found out that HOA board meetings were supposed to be open to all homeowners per Ohio law and our specific bylaws. I also discovered that any homeowner had the right to address the board during the public comment period, which was required to be at least 15 minutes long and couldn't be denied except in emergency situations. Monday evening came, and I dressed in business casual, khakis and a button-down shirt, and drove to the community center. The meeting room was small, with a folding table at the front where the 5 board members sat, and about 30 chairs set up in rows facing them. When I walked in at 6:45, only a handful of other homeowners were there. Brenda sat in the center seat, with Linda to her right. Joe Martinez, a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair, sat to her left. Sally Chen, a petite woman who looked uncomfortable, sat next to Linda, and Bob Preston, a retired firefighter with white hair and a weathered face, sat on the far left. Brenda's expression when she saw me walk in was priceless. Her face went tight, and she leaned over to whisper something to Linda, who turned to look at me with narrowed eyes. I took a seat in the 3rd row and nodded politely at the other homeowners. A few more people trickled in over the next 15 minutes. By 7 p.m., there were about 12 of us in the audience. Brenda called the meeting to order and worked through the standard opening items, approving the previous meeting's minutes, discussing the treasurer's report, reviewing ongoing landscaping contracts for the common areas. It was all very routine and boring, exactly the kind of community bureaucracy that made most people's eyes glaze over. Then came new business. "We have one item of new business," Brenda said, her voice taking on a clipped tone. Ryan Shepard submitted a letter regarding alleged covenant violations throughout the community. She said, alleged like the word tasted bad. Joe Martinez spoke up. "I read through Ryan's documentation. It's quite thorough. He's identified 29 separate violations with photo evidence and specific covenant citations. This seems like something we need to address." Linda jumped in immediately. "These are mostly minor issues that have been handled through informal warnings. We don't need to make a big production out of it. Informal warnings." Joe looked at her. "Do we have documentation of these informal warnings?" Linda and Brenda exchanged a glance. "We handle minor issues on a case-by-case basis," Brenda said. "We use discretion." Bob Preston leaned forward. "Discretion is fine, but we still need to document our enforcement actions. That's basic procedure. If we're issuing warnings and fines for some violations, we need to be consistent with all violations." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Brenda said, her voice rising slightly. "Ryan Shepard is trying to create drama where none exists. He received a legitimate violation notice for visible outdoor storage, and instead of just complying like a normal person, he's trying to weaponize the HOA against his neighbors." That was my cue. I raised my hand. Brenda looked at me like I just tracked mud across her white carpet. "Yes, I'd like to address the board during public comment. Public comment is at the end of the meeting." Joe looked at his agenda. "Actually, bylaws require public comment before we vote on any new business items. If we're going to discuss Ryan's letter, he should have the chance to speak to it first." Brenda's jaw clenched, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. Ryan, you have 3 minutes." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you. I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to create drama or weaponize anything. I'm asking for fair and equal enforcement of our community rules." I looked directly at Brenda. "When I received a violation notice for 3 garden tools stored against my garage wall, tools that were barely visible and weren't bothering anyone, I was told that rules are rules, and that I'd be fined $200 if I didn't comply within 7 days. So I complied, and then I read our entire covenant to understand what other rules I needed to follow. I turned to address the rest of the board. What I discovered is that there are numerous violations throughout our community that have been ignored for months or even years. The most significant of these violations involve boats and RVs parked in driveways, which according to Section 9, Paragraph 2, are prohibited for more than 48 consecutive hours. These violations carry fines of $500 initially, plus $250 per month thereafter. There are 14 such violations in our neighborhood. Some of these boats and RVs have been parked illegally for over a year. If we're going to enforce rules strictly for garden tools, we need to enforce them strictly for boats and RVs. That's not drama, that's fairness. Brenda cut in. Are you finished? Not quite. I want to specifically address one of these violations. I pulled out a photo from my folder and held it up. It showed Brenda's house with the boat clearly visible in the driveway. This is 847 Maple Drive, which is President Morrison's residence. This boat has been parked in the driveway continuously for at least 13 months, as documented by Google Street View historical images. By my calculation, using the fine schedule in Appendix C of our covenant, the accumulated fines for this violation would be $3,250. The room went absolutely silent. Several board members leaned forward to look at the photo. Sally Chen's eyes went wide. Bob Preston's eyebrows shot up. I'm not asking for special treatment, I continued. I'm asking that the rules be applied consistently to everyone, including board members. If my shovel deserves a fine, then illegal boat parking deserves a fine. If we're going to be strict about minor aesthetic issues, we need to be equally strict about major covenant violations. I looked at each board member in turn. The HOA is supposed to serve the community, not the personal preferences of whoever happens to be president. Thank you for your time. I walked back to my seat in complete silence. Brenda's face had gone from red to almost purple. Linda was whispering furiously at her, but Brenda wasn't responding. She was just staring at me with an expression of pure hatred. Joe Martinez cleared his throat. That's a serious allegation, Ryan. Do you have documentation to back up the 13-month timeline? I pulled out another folder. I have printed Google Street View images showing the boat in the driveway from March of last year, July of last year, and November of last year. I also have photos I personally took last week and earlier today. The boat hasn't moved. I handed the folder to Bob Preston, who was closest to me. He flipped through it, his expression growing more serious, then passed it to Joe. As it made its way down the table, I watched each board member's reaction. Joe looked troubled. Sally looked uncomfortable. Linda looked defensive. And Brenda looked like she wanted to throttle me. This is ridiculous, Brenda finally said. That boat belongs to my husband. It's not an HOA matter. Joe looked up from the photos. Brenda, the covenant doesn't distinguish between homeowner-owned vehicles and vehicles owned by family members residing at the property. If the boat is parked at your residence, it's subject to the same rules as everyone else's boats. My husband uses that boat regularly. It's not just sitting there. Bob Preston spoke up, his voice calm but firm. Brenda, I drive past your house every day on my way to the gym. That boat hasn't moved in over a year. The tires are flat. There's a bird's nest visible under the cover. That's not the point, Linda interjected. The point is that Ryan is trying to cause problems because he's upset about getting a legitimate violation notice. No, Joe said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. The point is that we have a responsibility to enforce our covenant fairly and consistently. If we're going to fine people for minor violations like visible garden tools, we absolutely need to address major violations like illegal parking of recreational vehicles. especially when those violations are being committed by board members. I move that we table this discussion until we can review all of the violations in Ryan's documentation, Linda said quickly. Second, Sally said quietly. Wait, Bob said. Before we vote on that, I want to understand something. Brenda, have you personally conducted inspections and issued violation notices to other homeowners while ignoring the boat violation at your own property? Brenda's silence was answer enough. Bob shook his head. That's a serious conflict of interest. Joe, what does our bylaws say about board members voting on or enforcing matters where they have a direct personal interest? Joe pulled out his own copy of the bylaws and flipped through it. Section 4, paragraph 7, states that any board member with a direct personal or financial interest in a matter before the board must recuse themselves from discussion and voting on that matter. Then Brenda needs to recuse herself from this entire discussion, Bob said. That's absurd, Brenda snapped. I'm the president. And you're also in violation of the covenant, Bob replied. You can't fairly adjudicate a discussion about covenant enforcement when you're actively violating the covenant yourself. I haven't violated anything. The boat situation is temporary. 13 months isn't temporary, I called out from my seat. The covenant specifically says 48 hours. Brenda whirled on me. You need to stop talking. This is a board discussion. Joe held up his hand. Actually, homeowners are allowed to participate in discussions that directly affect them, and since Ryan's letter prompted this whole thing, he has standing to comment. He looked at Brenda. Bob's right. You need to recuse yourself from this discussion. I'm not doing that. The room got very quiet again. Joe and Bob exchanged a long look. Then Joe said, Brenda, if you refuse to recuse yourself, I'm going to make a motion to have you removed from your position as president due to conflict of interest and failure to uphold your fiduciary duty to the HOA. You can't do that. Actually, I can. Bylaws Section 5, Paragraph 12, allows for removal of officers by a majority vote of the board for cause. Refusing to recuse yourself from a matter where you have direct personal interest constitutes cause. Brenda looked around the table. Linda was shaking her head frantically, but Sally was staring at her hands and Bob was nodding slowly. This is insane, Brenda said. You're going to destroy this HOA over a boat. No, Joe said quietly. You're destroying your credibility as president by refusing to apply the same standards to yourself that you apply to everyone else. That's what this is about. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Brenda stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room. Linda jumped up and scurried after her. The remaining 3 board members looked at each other. Sally spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? Joe took a deep breath. We follow the bylaws. We need a quorum of 3 board members to conduct business, and we have that. Bob, do you want to move to acting president temporarily? So moved, Sally. Sally nodded. Second. All in favor? Joe and Bob raised their hands. Sally hesitated, then raised hers too. Motion carries. Bob, you're acting president until we can sort this out properly. Bob moved to the center seat. He looked at me. Ryan, on behalf of the board, I apologize for the inconsistency in our enforcement. You were right to call this out. We're going to review every violation in your documentation and enforce them all consistently, including the one at Brenda's property. Thank you, I said. That's all I wanted. That said, Bob continued, we're going to need some time to do this properly. I'm going to recommend that we schedule a special meeting in 2 weeks specifically to address covenant enforcement procedures and ensure we have a fair and consistent system going forward. In the meantime, I'm going to personally send notice to all 14 homeowners with boat and RV violations, including Brenda, that they have 30 days to bring their properties into compliance or face fines as specified in the covenant. Joe nodded. I'll second that approach. It gives everyone fair warning and a reasonable time to comply. Sally raised her hand tentatively. Should we also review all the violation notices that have been sent out over the past year, just to make sure they were all legitimate and consistently applied? Good idea, Bob said. Sally, can you pull all the enforcement records for the past 12 months and prepare a summary for the special meeting? I'll do my best. Bob looked back at me. Ryan, I assume you'll want to attend the special meeting. Absolutely. You're welcome to. And again, I apologize that it took this kind of confrontation to address these issues. The HOA should be working for all homeowners, not against them. The rest of the meeting was short. They handled a few minor budget items, set the date for the special meeting, and adjourned. As people filed out, several homeowners came up to me to shake my hand and thank me for speaking up. Tom Henderson, who I hadn't realized was in the audience, clapped me on the shoulder. That was beautiful, man. Absolutely beautiful. I just hope it actually leads to some changes, I said. Oh, it will. Did you see Brenda's face? She's done. No way she survives this. I drove home feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. I'd made my point, but I'd also made a very powerful enemy. Brenda Morrison didn't strike me as the type to let this go. I was right to be worried. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker on my front door. It was a code violation notice from the city of Columbus, claiming that my gutters were improperly draining and creating a public hazard. I walked around my house, inspecting the gutters. They were fine. They drained into my downspouts exactly as they were supposed to, with no overflow, no leaks, no problems. I called the city code enforcement office and asked about the complaint. The inspector told me that they'd received an anonymous complaint about water drainage issues at my property and were required to follow up. When I explained that there was no issue, she agreed to come back out for a re-inspection. She arrived that afternoon, walked around my house, and confirmed what I already knew. Your gutters are fine. I don't know who reported this, but there's no violation. I'll close out the complaint. Can you tell me when the complaint was filed? She checked her tablet. Yesterday evening, around 8:30 p.m. About an hour after the HOA meeting ended. The next day, I got a letter from the county health department claiming that someone had reported a mosquito breeding concern at my address. I had to take time off work to meet with a health inspector, who walked around my yard, found no standing water whatsoever, and closed the complaint. The day after that, I got a notice from the utility company that someone had reported a potential gas leak at my address. The utility company doesn't mess around with gas leaks, so they sent a crew out immediately, sirens and all. My neighbors came out to watch as workers in hard hats tested every line and connection at my house. No leak. Another false report. I knew exactly what was happening. Brenda was harassing me with fake complaints, trying to make my life miserable. But I couldn't prove it since all the complaints were anonymous. Then I got a call from my car insurance company. Someone had filed a hit and run report, claiming that my vehicle had sideswiped a parked car on Maple Drive. I had to provide photos of my car, which didn't have a scratch on it, and documentation of where I was at the time of the alleged incident, which was at home on a video conference call with time-stamped recordings. That one actually worried me because filing a false police report is a crime. Whoever was doing this was escalating. I documented everything meticulously. Dates, times, the nature of each complaint, how they were resolved. I also installed a security camera system around my house, including a camera that had a clear view of the street and my driveway. If Brenda or anyone else was going to mess with my property directly, I wanted evidence. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. In the 2 weeks leading up to it, I continued receiving fake complaints and false reports every few days. Code enforcement, health department, utility companies, even the fire marshal showed up once to inspect my smoke detectors based on an anonymous concern. I compiled all of this into another document and added it to my folder for the meeting. This was beyond petty HOA drama. This was harassment, and potentially criminal harassment at that. The day of the special meeting, I got home from a rare in-office day at work to find my mailbox had been knocked off its post. It was lying in my yard, the post snapped clean through. My security camera caught the whole thing. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a white Lexus SUV with plates that read Rules 1 Cent had slowed down in front of my house, and someone had leaned out the passenger window with a baseball bat and knocked the mailbox clean off. I couldn't see the driver clearly because of the angle, but I could see the license plate perfectly. Brenda's car. And I could see the passenger clearly enough to identify her. Linda Walters. I saved the footage to 3 different locations, then called the Columbus Police non-emergency line. I explained that I had video evidence of vandalism to my property and wanted to file a report. They sent an officer out within an hour. Officer Martinez, no relation to Joe from the HOA board, was a stocky woman in her 30s with sharp eyes. She watched the security footage on my laptop twice, took notes, and then looked at me seriously. "You know why someone would target your property like this?" "Yes," I said, and explained the whole situation. The HOA dispute, the violation notice about my shovel, my documentation of Brenda's boat violation, the board meeting confrontation, and the 2 weeks of fake complaints and false reports. She took detailed notes through all of it. "Do you have documentation of these other incidents?" I handed her my folder. She went through it page by page, her expression growing more serious. "Mr. Shepard, this looks like a pattern of harassment. The mailbox destruction is criminal mischief, which is a misdemeanor. But combined with filing false reports, which is also a crime, and this pattern of behavior, we might be looking at something more serious." "What do you mean?" "Depending on how the prosecutor's office wants to handle it, this could potentially be charged as stalking or persistent harassment, which are more serious offenses. Let me file this report and pass it along to a detective. Someone will follow up with you." She took copies of everything, including the security footage, and gave me a case number. After she left, I went inside and called my home insurance company to file a claim for the mailbox. Then I called a locksmith and had my locks changed. If Brenda was willing to destroy my mailbox in broad daylight, I didn't want to take chances. The special HOA meeting that evening was packed. Word had gotten around about what happened at the previous meeting, and at least 40 homeowners showed up. The room was standing room only. Bob Preston called the meeting to order. Brenda was there, sitting in the front row with Linda, both of them looking defiant. Joe Martinez sat at the board table with Bob and Sally. 2 empty chairs remained where Brenda and Linda had previously sat. "Before we begin," Bob said, "I need to address a few organizational matters. Due to the conflict of interest issues raised at our last meeting, Brenda Morrison has been removed from her position as president. Linda Walters resigned as vice president. I'm currently serving as acting president and will be holding elections for permanent officers at next month's regular meeting." Brenda stood up. "That's illegal. You can't remove a president without a vote of the full board." "We had a vote," Joe said. 3 members voted, which constitutes a quorum. You weren't present because you left the meeting. I want my position reinstated. That's not on the agenda for tonight, Bob said. If you want to challenge the board's action, you can follow the dispute resolution process outlined in the bylaws. Tonight, we're here to discuss covenant enforcement procedures. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue more, but Linda pulled her back down into her seat. Bob continued. Sally prepared a summary of all violation notices issued over the past 12 months. Sally, can you present your findings? Sally stood up, looking nervous. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation that she projected onto the wall. Over the past 12 months, we issued 47 violation notices. Of these, 39 were issued in the past 6 months, which corresponds with when Brenda became president. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a breakdown by type of violation. 22 of the 47 notices were for minor aesthetic issues like visible trash cans, garden tool storage, or minor lawn maintenance issues. 15 were for decorative standards violations like unapproved paint colors or lawn ornaments. 7 were for structural issues like damaged fencing or roof repairs. And 3 were for noise complaints. Next slide. What's significant is what violations weren't enforced. Despite having clear rules about boat and RV storage, no violation notices were issued for any of the 14 properties currently in violation, even though most have been in continuous violation for months or years. We also didn't issue any notices for basketball hoops positioned too close to the street, even though there are 7 such violations. And we didn't enforce the rules about commercial vehicles, even though there are 3 properties with work trucks regularly parked in driveways overnight. She clicked to a final slide. Looking at the pattern, it appears that enforcement was focused primarily on minor aesthetic issues that were easily visible from the street, while larger violations that might affect board members or their friends were ignored. Bob nodded. Thank you, Sally. That's exactly the kind of inconsistency we need to address. Going forward, I'm proposing that we implement a new enforcement procedure that's fair, transparent, and consistently applied. He outlined a system where violations would be documented through monthly inspections, using a checklist that covered all covenant rules equally. First-time violations would receive a warning with 30 days to correct. Second violations would result in fines according to the schedule in the covenant. All enforcement actions would be logged and reported to the full board monthly, and any homeowner could request a hearing to contest a violation. Most importantly, Bob said, no board member will conduct inspections or issue violations at any property where they have a personal relationship or conflict of interest. We'll rotate inspection duties among board members to prevent bias. It was a reasonable, fair system. Joe moved to adopt it, Sally seconded, and it passed unanimously among the 3 current board members. Then came the hard part. Now we need to address the existing violations, Bob said. Ryan Shepard documented 29 violations in his original letter. We've verified all of them. Per our new procedures, we're going to issue warnings to all 29 properties, including the boat violations, giving them 30 days to come into compliance. Brenda stood up again. You can't fine me for my boat. That's retaliation for the board dispute. We're not fining you, Bob said patiently. We're issuing you a warning, the same warning we're issuing to 13 other homeowners with similar violations. You'll have 30 days to move the boat to compliant storage. If you don't, then you'll receive a fine, same as anyone else would. This is discrimination. No, Brenda, it's equal treatment. That's the whole point. Linda stood up next to Brenda. What about Ryan's mailbox? Did he get a violation for that? I felt my jaw clench. The fact that she brought up the mailbox, the same mailbox that she'd helped destroy just hours earlier, was bold even for her. Bob looked confused. What about Ryan's mailbox? It's knocked down, Linda said with fake innocence. Lying in his yard. That's definitely a covenant violation, damaged property visible from the street. I stood up. My mailbox was vandalized this afternoon. I filed a police report about it. In fact, I have security camera footage showing exactly who did it. The room went dead silent. Linda's face went white. Brenda's expression didn't change, but I saw her hand tighten on her purse strap. I have video of a white Lexus SUV with the license plate rules 1SD slowing down in front of my house at 2:15 this afternoon. The passenger leaned out the window with a baseball bat and destroyed my mailbox. The license plate belongs to Brenda Morrison's vehicle, and the passenger is clearly identifiable as Linda Walters. The room erupted. People started talking all at once, some gasping, some shouting questions. Bob had to bang his gavel 3 times to restore order. That's a serious accusation, Ryan, Bob said. It's a documented fact. Columbus police already have the footage. Case number is 248847B. I looked directly at Brenda and Linda. I also documented 14 separate false reports filed against me over the past 2 weeks, all anonymous, all filed within hours or days of the board meeting where I presented evidence of covenant violations. Code enforcement, health department, utility companies, even a false hit and run report. The police are investigating that as well. Brenda finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage. You can't prove any of that was me. Maybe not individually, but the pattern is clear, and now I have video evidence of you committing criminal mischief. The detective assigned to my harassment case is going to be very interested in that video. Linda grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. This is slander. It's not slander if it's true, Joe said. And if Ryan filed a police report, that's a matter of public record. Linda, did you destroy Ryan's mailbox? Linda didn't answer. She just turned and walked toward the door. Brenda followed her. Bob called out, Brenda, Linda, if you leave now, we're going to have no choice but to take additional action. Please sit down and let's handle this properly. They kept walking. The door slammed behind them. Bob looked at Joe and Sally. I think we need to suspend both of them from the board pending the outcome of the police investigation. Agreed, Joe said. Second, Sally said quietly. The vote was unanimous. The meeting continued for another hour, mostly homeowners asking questions about the new enforcement procedures and expressing their support for fair and consistent rule application. Several people came up to me afterward to thank me again and to express their disgust at Brenda and Linda's behavior. Tom Henderson caught me on the way out. Dude, I can't believe they actually destroyed your mailbox. That's insane. I can believe it. Brenda's been getting more desperate every day. Do you think the police will actually charge them? I don't know. The evidence is pretty clear, but it's also just a mailbox. They might treat it as a minor property crime. I was wrong about that. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, I was having coffee on my back deck when I saw 2 police cars pull up to Brenda's house. I watched as 4 officers approached the door and, after a brief conversation, placed Brenda in handcuffs and put her in the back of a patrol car. 10 minutes later, another patrol car arrived at Linda's house, 2 streets over, and the same thing happened to her. My phone rang. It was Detective Sarah Kowalski, the investigator who'd been assigned to my case. Mr. Shepard, this is Detective Kowalski. I wanted to let you know that we've arrested Brenda Morrison and Linda Walters this morning. They're being charged with criminal mischief for the mailbox destruction and filing false reports and criminal harassment. Based on the evidence you provided and additional evidence we gathered, the prosecutor's office decided there was sufficient cause. What additional evidence? We pulled phone records and found that both women made multiple calls to city and county offices from their phones during the time frame of the false reports you documented. We also found text messages between them discussing, and I quote, making that jerk Ryan's life hell until he moves away. That established clear intent. Wow, I didn't expect it to go this far. Property crimes and false reports are serious, Mr. Shepard, and when they're part of a sustained harassment campaign, prosecutors take that even more seriously. Both women will be arraigned tomorrow. You may be contacted to testify if this goes to trial, but given the evidence, I expect they'll accept a plea deal. They did. 6 weeks later, after their attorney saw the security footage, the phone records, the text messages, and the documented pattern of fake complaints, both Brenda and Linda pled guilty to criminal mischief and filing false reports. The harassment charge was dropped as part of the plea. Brenda was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 120 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my mailbox plus damages for my time dealing with the false complaints. Linda got the same, except her community service was only 80 hours. They were also permanently banned from serving on the HOA board and fined by the HOA for their covenant violations. Brenda had to pay $3,250 in accumulated boat parking fines, and she had to move the boat within 30 days or face additional penalties. She ended up selling the boat to avoid the hassle. The HOA held new elections. Bob Preston was elected president, Joe Martinez became vice president, and Sally Chen stayed on as a board member. 2 new members were elected, including Tom Henderson, who'd been motivated to get involved by the whole fiasco. Under Bob's leadership, the HOA actually became functional. They enforced rules fairly and consistently, gave people reasonable warnings before issuing fines, and generally acted like adults. The neighborhood improved because people weren't afraid of arbitrary punishment anymore. They actually wanted to maintain their properties to community standards. As for me, I put my garden tools back against my garage wall. Nobody said a word about it. I also planted a small garden in my backyard and put up a tasteful fence, all properly approved through the HOA's new streamlined approval process. About a year after everything settled, I was outside mowing my lawn on a Saturday morning when I saw a moving truck pull up to Brenda's house. I watched as movers loaded furniture and boxes into the truck. Brenda came out once, directing the movers, but she didn't look my way. By the end of the day, the house was empty. Tom came over that evening with a couple of beers. We sat on my back deck and watched the sunset. "Did you see Brenda's moving out?" he asked. "Yep. Can't say I'm sad about it. Word is she and her husband are getting divorced." The whole HOA thing and the criminal charges were the last straw. He moved out months ago. That's rough, but she brought it on herself. Tom clinked his beer against mine. You know what the crazy thing is? If she just applied the rules fairly from the start, none of this would have happened. She could have told you about the shovel thing without being a jerk about it, could have acknowledged her own boat violation and fixed it. Instead, she had to be petty and vindictive, and it destroyed her. Some people can't help themselves. They get a little bit of power and it goes straight to their head. Well, thanks to you, we've got a functional HOA now. Bob's been great. The neighborhood feels different better. People actually talk to each other at the meetings instead of just being scared of getting fined. That's all I wanted, I said. Just fairness, just consistency. That's not too much to ask. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and enjoying the evening. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from the HOA, the monthly newsletter. Bob had written a column about the importance of community standards, and how they only work when everyone, including leaders, follows the same rules. I smiled and put my phone away. Sometimes standing up for what's right is messy and complicated and creates conflict, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, rules without fairness aren't really rules at all. They're just tools for bullies to use against people they don't like. And I wasn't going to live in a neighborhood run by bullies. 6 months after Brenda moved out, I was at the community center for a regular HOA meeting. Nothing dramatic, just routine business. We were discussing plans for resurfacing the neighborhood pool deck and reviewing bids from contractors. It was boring in the best possible way, the kind of boring that meant things were working properly. After the meeting, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was probably in her early 30s, dressed professionally with kind eyes. "Are you Ryan Shepard?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Jennifer Foster. My husband and I just bought the house on Maple Drive, the one that was Brenda Morrison's. Oh, welcome to the neighborhood. Thank you. I wanted to introduce myself and also thank you." "Thank me for what?" she smiled. "When we were doing our due diligence before buying, we requested the HOA records for the past 2 years. We saw everything that happened, the meeting minutes, the enforcement records, the changes you pushed for. It's actually one of the reasons we decided to buy here. We wanted to live somewhere with a fair, functioning HOA, not one where the president abuses power." I hadn't expected that. "Well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad something good came out of all that mess. More than you probably realize. My husband and I have lived in 3 different HOA neighborhoods, and they've all been nightmares. Arbitrary rules, selective enforcement, boards that acted like feudal lords. This is the first place we've found where the HOA actually seems to serve the community instead of controlling it." We chatted for a few more minutes and then she headed home. I stayed behind to help Bob fold up chairs and put away tables, a small volunteer thing I'd started doing after everything settled down. "New neighbors seem nice," Bob said as we stacked the last of the chairs. "Yeah, they do. You know, Ryan, I've been thinking about that whole situation with Brenda. Do you have any regrets about how you handled it?" I considered the question carefully. "Honestly, no. I wish it hadn't been necessary. I wish Brenda had been reasonable from the start. But she wasn't, and somebody needed to stand up to her. I'm glad it was me." "Me too. You did the right thing even though it was hard. That takes courage." "It didn't feel like courage. It felt like stubbornness and spite," Bob laughed. "Sometimes those are the same thing. The point is, you didn't back down when someone was abusing their authority. You fought back with documentation, facts, and the actual rules. That's how you create change." We finished cleaning up and locked the community center. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Meadowbrook Heights, I passed house after house with neatly maintained lawns, appropriate decorations, and no boats or RVs parked illegally in driveways. The neighborhood looked good, felt good. People waved at each other, kids played outside, neighbors actually talked instead of hiding from each other. It was everything an HOA neighborhood was supposed to be, and it had taken a fight to get there. When I got home, I parked in my driveway and looked at my house. My garden tools were exactly where I wanted them, leaning neatly against my garage wall. My mailbox stood straight and sturdy, professionally installed after the vandalism. My lawn was mowed, my garden was thriving, and everything was exactly how I wanted it. Inside, I made myself dinner and settled in to watch some television. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Henderson. "Beer tomorrow, I'm grilling." "Sounds good," I replied. Life was normal again. Boring, peaceful, normal, and it was perfect. The shovel that had started everything was still there, right where I'd always kept it, leaning against my garage next to the rake and the hoe. Sometimes when I walked past it, I thought about how something so small and insignificant had become the catalyst for such major changes. It reminded me that standing up for yourself matters, even when the issue seems petty, because it's never really about the shovel or the boat or the specific rule. It's about power, fairness, and whether people with authority are going to use it responsibly or abuse it. Brenda had chosen to abuse it, and she'd paid the price. The neighborhood was better for her absence. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, not really, but I didn't regret it either. She'd made her choices, and those choices had consequences. As for me, I kept living my life, working from home, maintaining my property, and being the kind of neighbor I'd always tried to be, someone who followed reasonable rules, helped out when needed, and didn't cause unnecessary trouble. The difference now was that I knew the rules applied to everyone equally, and if they didn't, I knew how to fix that. That shovel, the one that had almost cost me $200 in fines, was probably the most important garden tool I'd ever own, not because of what it did to my garden, but because of what it did to my neighborhood. It became a symbol of standing up for fairness, of demanding that rules be applied consistently, of refusing to be bullied by petty tyrants with clipboards and inflated egos. And every time I used it to dig in my garden or clear snow from my driveway, I smiled and remembered that sometimes the smallest things can create the biggest changes. You just have to be willing to stand your ground and fight for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to just comply and stay quiet. Because at the end of the day, the only thing necessary for bullies to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And I wasn't going to do nothing. Not in my neighborhood, not in my community, not in my life. That shovel represented my refusal to be pushed around. And it was staying right where it was, visible from the Hendersons' second-story window or anywhere else, because it was my property, my house, my life, and I'd earned the right to live it on fair terms. Brenda Morrison had tried to find me for storing a shovel. Instead, she'd lost her position, her reputation, her freedom for a while, and eventually her home. All because she couldn't stand the idea that rules might apply to her the same way they applied to everyone else. Some people never learn that lesson. They go through life thinking they're special, that they're above the rules, that they can use power however they want without consequences. Then they run into someone who won't back down, someone who understands that fairness matters more than convenience, someone who's willing to fight. I was that someone, and my neighborhood was better for it. The story could have ended there, with Brenda gone and the neighborhood at peace. But life doesn't always wrap up that neatly. There was one more chapter to this saga, one final confrontation that brought everything full circle. It happened about 18 months after the original incident. I was at the grocery store on a Wednesday evening doing my weekly shopping when I turned down the cereal aisle and nearly ran my cart into someone coming the other way. It was Brenda. We both stopped, frozen, staring at each other. She looked different, older somehow, with more gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, a far cry from the designer athleisure she'd always favored. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "Ryan." "Brenda." Another pause. People moved around us, reaching for cereal boxes, oblivious to the tension. "I hear the neighborhood's doing well," she said finally. "It is. Bob's been a good president, fair." She flinched at that word but nodded. "That's good. That's how it should be." "Yes, it should." She looked at her cart, which held generic brands and discount items, another change from the premium products she'd always bought. "I suppose you're happy about how things turned out." I thought about that carefully. I'm happy the neighborhood has a functional HOA now. I'm happy rules are being applied fairly. I'm not happy about what you went through, but I'm not sorry I held you accountable either. I lost everything, she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion. My position, my reputation, my marriage, my house. All because of a stupid boat and too much pride. No, I corrected gently. You lost everything because you treated people unfairly and then committed crimes when they called you out on it. The boat was just the beginning. The harassment, the vandalism, the false reports, those were your choices. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I know you're right. It took me a long time to see it, but you're right. I was awful to you and to a lot of other people. I used the HOA like it was my personal kingdom, and I punished anyone who didn't fall in line. That was wrong. I hadn't expected an apology if that's what this was. Thank you for saying that. I'm in therapy now, she continued. Court ordered at first, but I kept going after my probation ended. I've been working on understanding why I acted that way, why I needed to control everything and everyone. It's been hard but helpful. That's good. I'm glad you're working on yourself. Are you really? She looked at me directly for the first time. Or are you just being polite? I considered lying, then decided she deserved honesty. Both, I guess. I never wanted to destroy your life, Brenda. I just wanted you to follow the same rules you were forcing on everyone else. But I'm genuinely glad you're getting help and trying to be better. That takes courage. More courage than I showed when I was HOA president. Maybe, but you're showing it now, and that counts for something. We stood there in the cereal aisle, two people who'd been enemies having an unexpectedly civil conversation. It was surreal. I need to ask you something, Brenda said, and I want you to be honest. Do you think I'm a bad person? That was a heavy question. I thought about it carefully. I think you were a bad HOA president. I think you made terrible choices that hurt people, but I don't know if that makes you a bad person overall. People are complicated. We're all capable of being petty and vindictive, and we're all capable of growth and change. Which one you are depends on what you choose to do going forward. She nodded slowly. That's a fair answer, more fair than I probably deserve. Everyone deserves fairness, Brenda. That was my whole point. A small smile crossed her face, sad but genuine. I finally understand that. Too late, but I understand it. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. I finished my shopping in a daze, thinking about the conversation. When I got home and unloaded my groceries, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Brenda's eyes, the weariness and regret. Part of me felt bad for her. Her life had been destroyed by her own actions, but destroyed nonetheless. Another part of me remembered the stress and anxiety she'd caused, the false reports, the vandalism, the harassment. She'd earned her consequences, even if those consequences had been harsh. The next HOA meeting, I mentioned to Bob that I'd run into Brenda at the store. How'd that go? He asked. Better than I expected. She seems like she's trying to be better. That's good. People can change if they want to. You think we were too hard on her? Bob shook his head. No. We held her accountable for her actions. That's not being too hard. That's being fair, which is what she should have been all along. If she's learning from it and growing, then maybe something good came out of the whole mess. He was right. I'd done what needed to be done. And if Brenda was using the experience to become a better person, then maybe there was a silver lining after all. Life in Meadowbrook Heights continued peacefully. The HOA functioned smoothly, neighbors got along, properties were well maintained, and rules were applied fairly and consistently. New families moved in, including the Fosters, and became part of our community. Old families stayed because they liked how things were working. And through it all, my garden tools stayed right where they'd always been, leaning against my garage wall. Sometimes neighbors would joke about it. "Hey Ryan, better be careful with that shovel. Might start a revolution." And I'd laugh and agree because it was funny now, in retrospect, how something so small had become so significant. But it wasn't really about the shovel, and it never had been. It was about standing up for yourself, demanding fairness and refusing to be bullied. It was about understanding that rules only work when they apply to everyone equally, including the people making the rules. It was about courage, justice, and community. And in the end, it was about creating a neighborhood where people wanted to live, not because they were afraid of arbitrary fines and petty tyrants, but because they knew they'd be treated fairly and with respect. That was worth fighting for. That was worth all the stress, confrontation, and difficulty. My shovel had started a small revolution, and that revolution had made my neighborhood a better place. And really, what more could you ask from a garden tool? Years from now, when new residents move into Meadowbrook Heights and wonder why the HOA seems so reasonable and fair, they might not know the full story. They might not know about Brenda Morrison and her boat, about the violation notice that started it all, about the board meeting confrontation or the criminal charges that followed. But they'll benefit from it anyway. They'll benefit from living in a community where rules are applied consistently, where board members serve the community rather than wielding power over it, where fairness matters more than personal vendettas. And somewhere in that history, barely remembered, will be the story of a shovel that changed everything. My shovel, the one that's still leaning against my garage wall, right where it belongs.